So Michael G. Adams is going to be running against Heather French Henry. So Heather French Henry, the former Miss America of 2000, is running for the Secretary of State's position. Michael G. Adams is already calling her Allison Grimes 2.0, so he's already starting with the name calling. So Michael G. Adams, he had said that the Secretary of State's job is supposed to be boring. You don't want to get into the headlines with the Secretary of State's job. With his photo ID law and his cleaning up the voter rolls, I'm sure he's going to get into the headlines. Maybe he's right, though. You know, if you're doing your job right, but or if you're a low-key corruptionist, you probably don't want any attention going to your, you know, like Mike Harmon or Allison Ball. What happened to the pension fund? You know, there's the treasurer and the auditor. He even audited the pension fund. He didn't find where the $33 billion just up and walked away. I guess it was that ghost that took it, huh? $33 billion in unfunded liability pensions. How did Kentucky politicians and officials and leaders lose $33 billion? That's over 500,000 Kentuckians could have got $50,000 for that. Instead, they have a big old debt, and they have no idea how they're going to pay for it. So Michael G. Adams is planning on using the Secretary of State's job to elevate him to the U.S. Senate after 8 years. So he doesn't really want to be the Secretary of State. He just wants to become the U.S. Senator. He plans on Mitch McConnell retiring in 2026. So he's sitting there thinking 2019, become the Secretary of State for 8 years. Well, that would actually be over 2026. So I think he's probably just going to use it for one term, but he had said that he was going to use it for 2 terms and then be the U.S. Senate. He's got $1 million. He bragged that he's the establishment candidate and that he could raise $1 million for his campaign, which may be all that he needs to get in there, just run a bunch of TV ads. Kentuckians aren't really paying attention anyways, with a turnout rate of 19%. Venezuela, Kentucky can learn a lot from Venezuela's democracy because they actually have a functioning democracy, but Kentucky's democracy does not function. So the old Mikester, this is his own nickname, so Michael G. Adams, the old Mikester, the old schmarmy and skeevy Mikester, he says economic development. Economic, like an asshole, right? Reconomics, stinkonomics, what an ostentatious, pretentious asshole. So Michael G. Adams, you know, he's already doing the name calling. He volunteered for Bush Quail 92 because he loved how they spelled potato. And then he also worked for Mitch McConnell, Ernie Fletcher, George W. Bush's Justice Department. Michael G. Adams actually was named to the General Counsel for the Republican Governors Association, which he served for 11 years. Matt Bevin appointed Michael G. Adams to the Kentucky State Board of Elections. And he says actually when he gets up there, he's going to give all the power to the State Board of Elections, and he's not even going to use his power as Secretary of State. So he worked at the State Board of Elections for 1.5 years, and he resigned so he could run for Secretary of State so he could have less power than that's what he's promising, but you know how power works. So he's pro-Second Amendment, he's anti-choice, he's got some small incremental changes to help with turnout, which may be enough to beat the Democrats, because that's all they got too. So the Democrats have small, incremental, progressive changes, and Michael G. Adams has a couple small, progressive changes. What Michael G. Adams does have is not just an idea, but he also is quoting the law of KRS 117 and 116, and he's saying that he wants incremental changes, but he's attaching it to the law of Kentucky to essentially say that he knows election law, he knows how to work it, he knows how to do it better, and this is a great idea. This is something that Heather French Henry should do. So Michael G. Adams wants to, get the photo ID law, which is KRS 117.227. He wants to clean up the voter rolls. He doesn't point out any KRS for that, though. He wants to reduce wait times for early voting by amending KRS 117.0851C to clarify that a county clerk may place early voting machines in any of the clerk's offices. He wants to make voting by mail easier by allowing folks who vote by mail to turn their mail ballot in by person by changing KRS 117.085, which is the same, 117.085, but 1A7. So 117.0851A7, he wants to change that mail-in ballot provision. He also wants to allow the party registration to be available to residents until the voter registration deadline, amending KRS 116.055. So if you want to become a Democrat or Republican, you have to do it like 6 months to a year in advance, and then registration deadline is a month in advance. So he's not saying he's going to do same-day registration. He's not going to do, automatic registration or instant runoff voting or, anything that actually would help Kentucky's failed democracy. But he is doing incremental changes. So by allowing people to change their party, if you want it to be a Republican, then you can change up until a month prior to the election instead of 6 months prior to the election, or vice versa. If you want to be a Democrat or Green or Libertarian, you have up until 1 month before the election instead of you have to do it 6 months beforehand. That'll help, but a little bit. He's going to make voting by mail easier. It kind of defeats the purpose if you're turning it in. But yeah, you should be allowed to turn it in by person. In person, so that's okay. That'll help reduce wait time. So he's for early voting machines. So he's going to change one of the laws to allow early voting machines to be put out earlier in the clerk's office. And so I believe Heather French Henry was for early voting. She said 2 or 3 Saturdays prior. So they agree on early voting. Now the difference between Michael G. Adams and Heather French Henry, I don't really recognize her name, but on the business side, well, hold on. The main difference is that he wants less voters and she wants more voters. So he wants a photo ID. He wants to clean up the voter rolls. He barely even makes, mention of how he's going to increase the voter turnout rate, whereas she says that this is a democracy. We fought and died for it. We need more voters, not less. So she wants more voters, not less. He wants less voters, not more. In fact, he had bragged to Carl Nett that he wants to clean up the voter rolls to not even get the Rand Pauls and Tommy Massey's elected. So he's going to, he's going to clean up the Republican voter rolls as well as the Democrats. So he's just going to clean the shit out of those voter rolls. You only got 19% that's voting anyway, so maybe we'll find an accurate number, right? So those are common sense ideas. The Democrats should adopt those ideas, but that's more like, just make sure the integrity and security of the election is, intact, but not so much getting more people out to vote. So the Secretary of State, a great Secretary of State, would increase the voter turnout rate every single election. Every election. Even if you're getting 60, 70%, you should aim for 80 to 90%. But 19%, that's abysmal. That is embarrassing. Now, I had to reanalyze Michael G. Adams because I'd kind of dismissed his candidacy because when he offered the bribe to Carl Nett, he grabbed a hold of Carl Nett's leg and he said he had a White House pass and he didn't. It's just weird. It's just creepy and smarmy and skeevy. You're going to grab a hold of another dude's, that's like a domination thing, isn't it? And then eventually Carl Nett's just kind of like, no, what are you doing, dude? So Michael G. Adams offers Carl Nett a bribe. He says he's the establishment candidate. He only wants the Secretary of State's position to use it as a jumping-off point. So he's not aiming to be the greatest Secretary of State. He just wants to get this little, tiny, low-level, dumb Kentucky position. And then once he's got his political credentials, he can say, well, I've been Secretary of State. Now I get to be Senator. So Carl Nett, I was telling people to go vote for him. He essentially made a liar out of me. He didn't lie. I believe what he said, but he's now endorsing Michael G. Adams, which I told people to vote for Carl Nett because Carl Nett has more integrity in his pinky than Michael G. Adams does in his whole body. But it actually turned out that Carl Nett doesn't have the integrity of Michael G. Adams' pinky, and that didn't have much integrity at all to begin with. The only ambitious idea I heard was from Jason Griffith, open primaries out of all the Democrats. So he was in favor of open primaries plus early voting and some other ones. Now, Heather only had 2 unique ideas. So the only 2 ideas that wasn't shared with the other Secretary of State candidates, one, she wanted to apply for grants to get updated voting equipment. That's obvious. She also wanted to eliminate the required excuses for getting an absentee ballot. I like that too, because now you get to get an absentee ballot without, having to, basically, you could get an absentee ballot for any kind of excuse. But now you don't need an excuse, so it makes it easy for people to get an absentee ballot. They may be out of town, they may be overseas, they may be in college, something may happen. This is a written ballot, so you get the written ballot and you get to look at it and, essentially do it like Colorado. where you get 30 days of a written ballot. Then they send it out to you, and it's your own specific one, and you got a paper trail, and it works really well. So the only unique idea is she wanted to get grants for better voting equipment, which that's common sense, but, you know, I don't know if a lot of people know that you have to, you know, go after those grants, so that's good to know. And then she also wants to eliminate those required excuses for absentee ballots. Great ideas. Both are good ideas. Incremental, but great ideas. She also is for early voting, and so is Michael G. Adams, and so is Jason Belcher and Jason Griffith. Everybody seems to be for early voting when it comes to the Democrats, so that's not unique, but that would help. She wants to restore voting rights to ex-felons. I think she said something about non-violent, non-treasonous ex-felons and ex-criminals, especially misdemeanors, I guess. But I guess you had to be a felon to get your voting rights taken away. So all 4 Democrat Secretary of State candidates, including the Democrat governor candidates, everybody on the Democratic side agrees with this. If you've done your time, then you should be welcomed back into society. And then extending poll hours, both Jason Belcher and Jason Griffith approved. So Heather wants early voting. Heather wants to restore voting rights to ex-felons, and she wants to extend polling hours. So to extend it, what, to 8 p.m.? Now, she had said something, you know, kind of stupid when she had said something about the unfunded mandates of same-day registration. So to extend poll hours, you'd have to extend it to what, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.? Well, where are you going to get the money? That's an unfunded mandate. You're going to extend it 2 more hours, so all the county clerks have to be open for 14 hours. So, you know, what, 2 hours? Do they get paid $10 an hour? How much are they getting paid? So all those poll workers. And then when the election actually, you know, was going on, same-day registration is you can go to vote and register and then vote at the same time. So by the time most Kentuckians thought, you know, realized that there was an election, once they realized that there was an election, then they said, okay, I want to go vote, but they hadn't registered, you know, because they were supposed to register a month you know, in advance. And so it was too late. It was too late. So same-day registration is a great idea. Both Jason Griffith and Jason Belcher suggested same-day registration, but she was not in favor of same-day registration, which how hard would it be to accept somebody's registration in addition to allowing them to vote? All you got to do is just, you know, the poll watcher, they have registration forms there. You fill out the registration, probably some affidavit saying that, you know, you're telling the truth, and then you hand it to them, and then they just set those papers on a pile. And then eventually those, you know, papers will get into the system. So how much would that cost? That seems very, you know, very tiny. So it seemed to me that she, you know, it's good that she's thinking about unfunded mandates, but she's questioning, you know, a really good idea with a dumb objection. So it seems like she's basically attacking this idea because somebody else had a better idea than her. So same-day registration is great, and she questions same-day registration. Heather French Renee does. Or Heather French Henry, not Renee, Henry. So Jason Belcher, he had a unique idea, automatic registration. So Heather didn't mention anything about automatic registration. Jeff Sebastian mentioned ranked choice voting. I don't remember Heather saying anything about ranked choice voting. Jason Griffith was for open primaries. Heather opposed open primaries, and I could see it both ways on open primaries. It's a very ambitious plan, but it does have a pretty big loophole to it. So my main criticism for Heather French Henry is that her overall reforms are the thoughts of a child. Oh, we're going to extend voter hours for 2 more hours. We're going to extend voting hour to 2 or 3 Saturdays. It's like she just took about 5 seconds to think about these things. If she actually looked at the major reforms that are out there, she'd be a great candidate. So should, you know, Michael G. Adams, both of them. Whoever actually adopts a major overhaul of Kentucky elections will get elected. Kentucky needs a revolution when it comes to their election process. The first thing I would do is I would declare Election Day Freedom and Democracy Day and make it a work-free holiday so working families can have plenty of time to consider the candidates and the questions and to drive to the polls and to go vote. They have plenty of time to do that. They don't have enough time to do that now. Working 9 to 5, you're having 6 to 6, and even if you extend it 2 more hours, you know, everybody's going to be tired, so the declaring Election Day a holiday is essential. It's obvious, too. Initiative, referendum, recall, give the power back to the people. Being in Colorado, I voted for so many issues, and when the people vote for an issue, it just becomes law. So what happens in Kentucky is they never ask the Kentucky people any questions whatsoever because they're going to make all the decisions. So you're only voting for your masters, but you're never voting for the policies. So they'll promise a policy here and there. Maybe you'll get it, maybe not. Who the fuck knows, right? They got to get it through the legislature, and it's got to be constitutional. So there's 3 branches of government that has to approve of an idea before it actually becomes law. So instant runoff voting to make it fair. So initiative referendum recall to bring democracy back to, to give the power back to the people of Kentucky. Instant runoff voting to make the election system actually fair. It's rigged against the independents, and instant runoff voting makes Kentucky elections fair, also more cordial. 30 days of electioning. This is Colorado. So you get mailed out written ballots 30 days in advance. It comes directly to your house. While Colorado does have a higher turnout rate, one problem with Colorado is that people throw their ballots away. They're like, I don't have time to Google. I don't have 1 to 5 minutes to Google this person's name. I can't talk to somebody about this ballot. And they ask questions, too, so they can just read the questions and, determine for themselves what they believe. But they throw the ballots away. And so sometimes the turnout rate doesn't reach the 50% threshold. It gets up there, 40%, 45%, so it's not at 19%. So Colorado has a much better democracy than Kentucky, but when it comes to Colorado voters, they seem to be fighting against voting. What? You want me to vote? To hell with you, society. And they throw their written ballots in. So anyways, this is awesome because essentially democracy in Colorado knocks on your door or mails it directly to you. And all you need is a 55-cent stamp to get it sent in, or you could just drop it off in the box. So it's wonderful. It works great. Plenty of time, and since they have all those issues, you need to really actually think about each one of those issues and look each one of those issues up to see, what are the political forces behind each one. There's also public finance elections. It would be cheaper overall, and it would ensure that elections are fair to all the contenders of the race. I would also suggest to Heather French Henry to adopt the 2 main Republican election reforms that all 4 of the candidates agreed on, including Michael G. Adams, the voter ID, the Indiana model, and cleaning up the voter rolls, the Ohio model. So Heather's reforms are slightly progressive, but so is Michael G. Adams, so neither one of them has, just the better platform. If I had to vote, this moment, this second, I would vote for Heather because she wants more voters overall, but he's getting, early voting, and he's actually changing the law for it, and then he's going to make the argument that he understands election law, he's got experience, and she doesn't have any, and he'd be somewhat right about that, but all she needs to do is read a couple of the election laws and maybe get some election, legal experts. So he's going to make voting by mail easier, allow the party registration. You can change it when the voter registration deadline is. So they're both for early voting, and she has a couple more, though. So she was in favor of getting grants to get some, better voting equipment. She wants to eliminate the required excuses for getting an absentee ballot. She wanted early voting, restoring the ex-felon voting rights. He hasn't talked about that at all, and extending polling hours. So, those are, again, marginal. They're not the biggest. They're not going to really change much. She's opposed to same-day registration, or she questions it, which is a dumb objection. And then she's opposed to open primaries. So she does not have major election reforms. She's got incremental election reforms. If I had to put them side by side, she has 1 or 2 that's a little bit better, and her overall vibe of getting more voters, not less, is, better for Kentucky. But I hope that Heather French Henry I hope Heather French Henry actually declares Election Day a holiday, get initiative referendum recall to bring power back to the Kentucky people, institute instant runoff voting to make sure the elections are fair, public finance elections also to make it fair but also to make it cheaper, and then 30 days of electioning with mailed out written ballots. Those are just 5, of my best major reforms, and I got some other ones. I think it would be a good idea to make one Kentucky voter a millionaire. You got the Kentucky lottery, right? So it costs millions of dollars to have an election, to run an election anyway, so by adding $1 million, you're not adding much to the total budget. But how many people would go out to vote if they knew that they might be able to win $1 million? So that's a good way to get out, people to encourage people to get out to go vote. And people might criticize that idea because they know it would work. it's a radical, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. That would encourage more people to come out to go vote. So yeah, vote for Heather French Henry, not Michael G. Adams. Even though I had to reassess him, he's quoting KRS, but hopefully Heather can, get her head in some KRS reform too, and quote some of the statutes and how she would, essentially enact the reforms that she's talking about.